Hey, folks, and welcome back to the program. My guest today is Wendy Hirschberg. Wendy is a good friend of my parents and now a friend of mine, I'd like to say. She has her master's in sculpture and also has a long career in diversity and inclusion, including 21 years at Ernst Young as director of diversity and inclusion. Now, diversity and inclusion is always important, but in this very fraught moment in our society, I think it's as important as it's ever been, and having these kinds of conversations can really help people sort of adjust to this moment, and what can we do to improve the lives of those who are routinely oppressed. And it was helpful for me to hear from her and to sort of get an idea of maybe some strategies to employ here to try to do our best. And then on the sculpture end of things, Wendy has been creating these talking sort of puppet-like characters, of which you'll see a few after the intro rolls, where these puppets share messages from people who are typically Black or Latino and have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic, as most of the statistics have shown, and as I'm sure a lot of you already know. And the puppets help share messages, intended to support these communities. And I think the puppets are very helpful because it can oftentimes be hard to hear messaging from people who are suffering, and we get so much of that in our daily lives. At least I have, as someone living in New York, there's many people who are asking for help, and whether it be online but also in person. I mean, I think of the homeless population in New York, it's incredibly distressing, and oftentimes I think we kind of just tune it out or we become numb to it, and of course that's unacceptable. So these puppets help relay the message in a way that creates a little bit of a separation between you and the person who is recording the message. So that was really helpful for me, and the messages certainly hit home. And I felt them inside, and I had a real emotional response to some of them, and I think you will too when you see them. So I want to thank Wendy for doing that project. It's noble of her to get these messages out to people, and it was helpful for me, and again, I think it will be helpful for you. So certainly let me know if you enjoyed those, and she's always posting more on her Instagram, and I'll leave that information in the description below. So without further ado, here it is, episode 36 of COVID Chats.
I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. My kids are at home and there's no one to watch them. How am I supposed to stay at home and support my family?
I go to the store y nadie tiene tapabocas. La gente no está manteniendo el distanciamiento social. It's really important. In my neighborhood, we have to go out to work, pero tenemos que seguir las reglas to keep from getting the virus.
I miss my friends at school because of the virus. I really miss seeing my friends who have no internet or computer for class.
Voy a la tienda y nobody has face masks. People aren't staying apart. Es súper importante. En mi neighborhood tenemos que salir a trabajar, pero necesitamos que la gente adhiera a las reglas to avoid getting the virus.
In my house, we follow the run rule. Remember to wear your mask at all times. Under no circumstances should you leave your house without a mask or gloves. And neglecting to practice social distancing is unsafe.
Hello, Wendy, and welcome to episode 36 of COVID Chats.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Yeah, it is a pleasure for me as well. I love talking to people who I don't really know very well or at all. I think it's a little bit of a greater challenge for me than talking to a friend, and it's great to sort of expand that network and talk to older folks who are a little more knowledgeable, a little more experienced. I think that can be helpful for me, and it's always good for the audience as well too. So
It's great. Thank you.
A pleasure. So, of course, you sent me your bio, which thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think this is a particularly interesting conversation because it has two facets to it. It has the diversity and inclusion aspect, of which you worked for many years in a couple different places, which I'll have you talk about a little more. And then also as an artist, as a sculptor, as someone who's been making puppets with most recently with people's voices behind them, particularly people of color and people in more marginalized communities, to try to get their message out during this pandemic. And of course, it's a very topical time for that in light of everything that's going on with protests and with just continued police brutality. So I want to talk about both of those aspects. But before we jump into that, I always like to ask my guests just how are you? How are you doing before we begin?
Oh, thank you. I guess that is almost all tied in with all the other things you just said. I mean, I think we're all experiencing, unusual levels of stress and, so much unknown. So that's how I am, like everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I felt very, very tired the past kind of day or two, and somewhat of a physical tiredness, but more just like an emotional tiredness. Just this very large weight on me, especially in some ways as a white person, but also just as someone who's just reading the news and just like what can I do, and it feels very hopeless at times. And then there's all this crosstalk and dialogue, and people are doing small things that are helpful, and some people are talking about larger change and working on the inside and the outside. It's overwhelming.
Absolutely. That's the word.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. It's a massive struggle to exactly know what the best tact is to take, and how one can do something to make a positive change. Certainly the right thing to do is not to do is to do something and not do nothing. I definitely want to do something, so I'm trying to figure that out, and COVID chats has helped a little bit in terms of the pandemic. This is of course a new crisis, or a continued crisis, I should say. So yeah. But I'm curious to start off with the artist angle of this. How's the pandemic been for you as an artist? Have you had trouble creating at times during this, or have you found moments of inspiration that maybe you wouldn't have found otherwise?
Well, I think I probably will answer from both perspectives, because of the work I was doing in diversity inclusion at Ernst Young. I was actually for about the last 6 years of my 21 years there focused a lot on the issues that are exploding in the streets all over the country. So there, were moments when I was in Baltimore with what we called our Black Professional Network, and feeling like, I'm not leading this conversation. I'm in this conversation, but I'm not leading. This is, coming together of concerns that have been generated by the videos of people being murdered by the police on, in many different settings. So Baltimore is just one example where I can just remember feeling like, so overwhelmed by the emotions in the room with the folks there. And so I guess what I would say is, part of the reason I paused and stopped making sculpture for the first time was because I was going so deeply into the different experiences of the people I was really getting close to at EY in my role. And so to pile on now, it's not an abstraction at all, but when you see the statistics of how the pandemic has affected Black and brown communities, amongst others, but predominantly the mortality rates are astounding. So that actually is what has led me to the art that I am doing now. I was doing, well, we'll get to that. I don't know if you want me to start yet. But the experience of what is going on in the streets and what is happening, what was happening to me as a professional being, really immersed in that world have really affected me as an artist profoundly, because I was doing very, very different kinds of art before I switched to the puppets.
Right. So would you mind, you would talk to me a little bit more about the puppets, and I've seen some of them are sort of clay people. I don't know exactly what the correct terminology is.
Yeah.
But I think it's really
Yeah,
a fabulous, yes. Oh, sorry to cut you off. It's just, it's a fabulous way to share messages of hardship that, would be otherwise difficult for people to hear and listen to. So, I'm curious, what about the puppets do you think makes it easier for that message to resonate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, just to describe a little bit for people who haven't seen them yet, the puppets are, sometimes they're sewn, sometimes they're clay heads with sewn and sculpted bodies. And their messages are very brief. I'm using an app that allows you to basically say 3 sentences. So, what I've been doing is started out with having the puppets share common experiences of bias. Some of them are workplace biases that are very familiar to a lot of people. Others are, things that have to do with maybe hair or cultural differences or, any identity difference. And what I started out doing, I think struck a chord because it is really difficult to be very personal about very painful experiences.
Yeah.
And so if you have this intermediary of the puppet or the character, I'm a little bit hesitant to call them puppets because people associate that with kid stuff and silly stuff.
Right.
But I haven't come up with a new word. So maybe somebody on the Zoom world will help me. But it's a step away from the person having to say it. However, as I developed the series, I have actually people's other voices, not my voice, speaking from their personal experience, but they don't have to show their face on camera. And I think that it also could be for the viewer a bit easier to take the message in. It's, because it does have that association with some sort of toy-like creature or small thing, or, it's not as, in your space in a certain sense as a person sharing something that was very, very painful. It's a very different interpersonal experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it made it easier for me certainly to hear people's message and to almost to be more connected to it and to really feel and hear the emotion behind it. I think, we're disconnected from our emotions and feelings these days a bit with so many things, especially during a pandemic with everything mediated by the screen. But just in general, I feel like we've kind of strayed from that a little bit as a society. And, now there's all this emphasis on, therapy and things like that to get back in touch with your feelings and your emotions because we're so removed from it. And, hearing messages through another medium helps a lot. I think of it as a New Yorker. There's so many homeless people. I've just heard so many messages of grief and anguish throughout my life. And, at certain points, it just becomes, is this person telling the truth or not? And not like, what are they actually saying? It's just, we become very, very removed from the message. So I think hearing it through another medium is very helpful, especially one that's, looks like a human, even if it's not, it's not.
Yeah.
But
yeah, one thing I would just add that's, you're making me realize is that, in the role I was in, I developed very trusting relationships, right? So I was able to cross a lot of different lines that sometimes in your life outside of work, we all get in our little pockets of who we, hang out with socially. And sometimes it becomes a very homogeneous world that we're connected to intimately. And in my role, really, I think maybe some of the power is coming straight through those relationships I was able to establish. The person is feeling comfortable recording this message for me to use in this way. And they feel like they're doing it by themselves because they're not sitting with me, but they know it's coming to me. And I feel like it's a gift for me that people have been entrusted me with these perspectives.
Yeah, I think it is a gift, and I think you've treated that gift very well. I mean, I think you've done a great job of sort of disseminating it out there and, putting it out there. And, really allowing those messages to be heard by other people both maybe in their community and people outside their community, just to get a better idea of, you know, what that's like. It's tremendously helpful for me, at least. I think it's helpful for other people too, if I had to guess.
Thank you.
uh,
Yeah, I mean, the virus, you know, my goal, just to explain why did I start moving
yeah,
from the bias issue to the virus, was related to what we were just talking about, seeing how the statistics and the mortality rates, and, you know, friends of mine were experiencing a very different, especially early, very different experiences where the option to stay at home wasn't an option, right?
right,
You know, if so, the messaging in the beginning was so dominated by stay at home.
right,
So that really was my motivation. Like, well, sorry, you know, I can't stay at home. I'm
right,
going out, like, you know, so what was breaking down, I think, is people would hear that phrase and they wouldn't hear put on your mask, and they
mm,
wouldn't hear, you know, wear a glove or whatever we were going to be doing in the beginning, because it
right,
was like, okay, I can't stay home, bye.
right,
You know, so I
right,
was watching that, the impact of that, even in this neighborhood where my studio is, which is mostly Spanish speaking people, were not getting any, you know, masks on their faces. Nothing was happening. And, you know, it just motivated me to try to get connected to some of the community leaders, to get, you know, see if the videos could get into a community that would help. So to your point, you know, sometimes the messaging is for inside of a community that
right,
isn't necessarily my community
right.
home, right?
Right. Yeah. No, that, I mean, that messaging is crucial, especially at the beginning, and even still now, it's very important that people have their masks on. And yes, there's absolutely groups that just can't stay home. I mean, you think about it, everybody who's been getting, you know, food delivered and whatnot. You know, who is the person who comes to your door? It's typically, you know, a person from a community of color. It's not, you know, maybe once in a while you will get a Caucasian, but I mean, there are many ways in which our world, you know, is run and is facilitated by people of color who are putting themselves out there, putting themselves at risk, because really they have to. They can't just stop working. You know, it's just not a feasibility. They can't just work from home, right? You know.
Right. The nursing home statistics are probably hidden, but
Mm.
a huge percentage, I've seen a huge percentage of people who work in nursing homes are people of color. And so even, you know, God knows there's probably more, you know, mortality rates that are masked by the fact that not all the locales are tracking the nursing home
Right.
mortality.
Right. Yeah, that's a problem too. The data not really being hidden or not being shown yet. You know, maybe will come out later in the coming months or whatnot. But so you know, I'll intersperse our conversation with some of these great puppets and the voices that you've created. I just want to show people some other artwork that you created, which is these beautiful ladies, members of your family.
Yeah, that one is from 1982, maybe, you know, so a lot of my artwork is not of people, figurative at all. So it's interesting to see that, you know, that sculpture that you grew up with, because I'm friends with your mom. Just
Yeah. Well, I certainly love it, and I had to include it in the COVID chat. You know. So, you know, pivoting a little bit to the, you know, the element of your career in diversity and inclusion, of course, of many questions regarding this. The first being, you know, with us so separated right now, it's hard to foster inclusion. You know, maybe what are some strategies that we can use that maybe you used in your corporate or even personal experience that to help with that, to make people feel included?
I think actually there are really amazing articles. There's one with like 75 ideas for what you can do as a white person to develop an ally relationship right now. So, I
Hmm.
mean, there's a lot of, you know, individual strategies, but, you know, what's at the core of any relationship really is trust, and actually a desire to connect, and an empathetic response to another person.
Hmm.
And I think often, if we're talking, let's say, about white majority perspectives, often people who are somewhat aware and are trying not to appear biased become sort of frozen in their fear of saying the wrong thing, offending somebody,
Right.
appearing racist, etc. Right? So
Right.
So I think, a first step is to sort of pause and just try to like maybe meditate on that thought and just try to let it go and realize, that when you meet anybody, the person can tell when you're genuinely interested in them.
Right.
We're just people, and the way we communicate, it gives off something about us without us even speaking, right?
Mm.
So, one of my favorite quotes from just discussions about these issues is, somebody once said, you talk to people in different ways, but you try to be, connect with people. So if you're at a party and you're talking to your grandmother and then you switch and you talk to your like 5-year-old niece, you're not really going to talk to them the same way, but you're going to find a way to make a connection across whatever differences, right? Like it's just an innate quality that we have. And I think just listening often is something people do like often to talk about themselves. Look at all the people who sign up to be on your channel, right? people naturally like to tell you their stories, right? So I think if you tap into things and just, build connections through genuine curiosity and you listen, a lot of the, sort of tips sort of fall away and fall to the side. There's certainly really important ones, and we all grow up with bias, conscious or unconscious or some combination.
Right.
So there's work to be done on, our own perspectives, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think the fundamental, one of the really, I think, wonderful things is when your personal life and your social life outside of, your work or your job is inclusive of people who are very different than you are.
Mm.
To me, that's like where the richness of the experience of inclusion really comes in, because inclusion is really about so many more things than diversity. I should probably define that for your audience.
Please.
So diversity is really all the identity dimensions, let's say. So age, LGBT could be, gay, lesbian, all their different like gender, conforming, all the different differences, age, religion, I could just keep going, right? So it's all dimensions of difference that are part of your identity, many of which overlap,
Right.
And even, culturally, there are people who are Black and Latino, also, and maybe gay or, so there's intersection that, I call it intersectionality in the field.
Yeah.
So that's the diversity piece. Inclusion is really more of an emotion-based experience where you're not feeling like an outsider in the organization or at your workplace or in your social circles. You feel part of something. You feel a sense of, of comfort being yourself, and it builds from there into, more equity and access to experiences that build your skills, certainly in a workplace context, which is often where I'm working, right? Is,
right.
How do you really develop in any organization? You need to understand the unwritten rules in organizations. And that doesn't happen if somebody doesn't mentor you or really, get to know you and bring you into their world. And that's something that bias really stands in the way of. So that's a huge area of, focus when you're a diversity inclusion person.
Right. I appreciate you defining those. I think oftentimes there's a lot of fog surrounding those words. It's not, they're used very often. And, I took a sociology class in college, so I'm a little, familiar with intersectionality to an extent, but not everybody took a sociology class, definitely.
Right. Some of these words, I just, go roll my eyes because like
right.
you're trying to do something to bring people together. You don't want to alienate anyone with
right.
complex language, right?
Yes, right. No need for additional terminology. Let's not cloud it any further. Let's peel back the layers. I think that point you raised earlier about the the hypothetical party and how you would talk differently to your grandmother or your 5-year-old. I think that's helpful because age is less taboo, or it's less of a touchy subject than race, particularly in this kind of gotcha culture that we have a little bit, and cancel culture, and Twitter, where every single moment is scrutinized and looked over and can end your career possibly, or your social life. So I think it's helpful to think about that aspect of it, and how do you, what is the similarity between you talking to a 5-year-old and you talking to your grandmother? Well, there's the element of the listening, right? It's like, and how we connect, and we can use that in other instances and improve our connection to people.
I think it's also, people talk about being authentic,
Mm.
and that's kind of where that story came up, because you're not being inauthentic if you're changing the way you communicate with somebody older than you. It's just a different dimension of your personality.
Right.
So when you're genuinely curious and empathy is part of the exchange, you're going to be able to make a connection.
I like that. So, how has COVID exacerbated some of the problems of diversity and inclusion? How can we combat it a bit? Because listening is very important, but if we're not somebody who has friends or knows people in communities of color, certainly we can listen to some of these puppets that you've created and things like that. But otherwise, we can just have our insular communities, and I can be hearing other white friends of mine talk about it. And not that doesn't have its place, but maybe how can we improve upon that? How can we try to take a different tack during this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if we use New York City as a backdrop, think of all the people that you interact with. Maybe I'm a kind of natural extrovert, and that's helped me in New York, because I'm the kind of person who, knows the Korean dry cleaner, even if they don't speak English very well.
Right.
Like when my mother died, for example, I left my clothes in my dry cleaners for like a really long time, and I really liked the people. So when I came back, I was very apologetic, and we're having this like broken conversation across languages. And when the woman who was on the other side of the table figured out what I was saying, she put all my stuff on the table, came around, hugged me in the store, and then she wouldn't let me pay for my clothes.
Wow.
So I think like if you walk through your life in New York, the door open to, really connecting, you're going to, you can make it a small town in your neighborhood is sort of the way I think about it.
Right.
So I think the harder thing to do is when you live in a community where you're in a car, and your community is locked down, from an identity perspective, maybe even, religion, all similar, everything that, we're listing, right? There's always going to be an outsider experience in that town, but that's where I think things are more difficult. I think in cities like New York, when you get on the subway, you have an opportunity to interact. You can listen and try to figure out, is that Chinese? Is that Japanese? Is that Korean? Like, you can engage in cultural differences in every setting in New York,
Right.
if you're awake to it, let's say.
Right. Yeah.
And I think those things matter. I think those things matter.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely a very big privilege to live in New York and to have that opportunity to engage with different types of folks. But in this current climate where we're still being asked to stay home and things like that, unfortunately, the virtues of New York in that regard are a little closed off. Is there, I don't want to harp on it. I know there might not be a clear answer, but is there any idea that maybe you've been kicking around, or anything we can do for that?
All I can say is, it's a horribly isolating time. I can't imagine what the next 2 to 5 years are going to be like, frankly. But I guess what I would say, just to use the same kind of thought process, I did run into my friend who's the hairdresser, whose shop is next to my studio just now, who's a Dominican woman. I exchanged emails with her because we've talked about all these different things. We're friends. And, I guess, again, like, if you connect with people outside of physical, right? Like, I have her email, we've been in touch during this time, we haven't seen each other. I'm like, oh, you got, so I know she was buying all the equipment for her shop, even though she really doesn't have the money to, to set it up. She said like a hospital for reopening, which is now June 22nd. So I guess, it's just a matter of, how open is your social media? Like how many people, do I have now from all over the country, thanks to Ernst Young, sharing their perspectives about so many different things, including the madhouse, everything, that's going on now. I have a friend in Atlanta who grew up, a Black woman who grew up in Chicago, and she wrote about, what it was like when Chicago was burning after Martin Luther King was killed, because she's probably my age, and, just these perspectives are coming at me through my social media at a different level than the news,
Yeah.
The person and where they're coming from. So to me, I guess what I'm saying is if you, find ways, especially, even Instagram, you can develop relationships with people you don't know through these things, right? Like that's the whole point, sort of. So, if this is a goal of yours, right now is an amazing opportunity. You could have a conversation with Trevor Wilson or, there's like all these amazing, little videos out there. You could just start connecting across any, with celebrity people or whomever.
Yeah. I think opening up your social media, trying to join groups with, different folks and new folks, and certainly hitting people up on, Instagram and sending them a message and just, asking to hear their story, whether it be for, something like this that, goes out on the web also, or also just, connecting and sharing some messages back and forth. That's probably.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky. One of the things I'm doing, I'm working with a consulting group called Thomas Leland, just part-time, but the people are mostly cultural anthropologists and have vast degrees. I have a master's in sculpture, so I'm like the practitioner person that learned on the job, over the years. But, these are really rigorous, intellectual, really interesting people from all over the world. And, that's been amazing because this is such a global moment, and we're like hearing from someone in Germany, Brazil, Chile, it's astoundingly global. And that's, I think, another experience that the pandemic is bringing forward, right? Like what other experience is just worldwide that we've had in our lifetimes, right?
Right. Yeah, very, very few. I mean, I think, this pandemic and then something that's ongoing has been kind of the advent of the internet and social media. Of course, not everybody has, internet connected devices and things like that. But, for the most part, that's definitely affected everyone, changed everything on a global level as well.
Absolutely.
So, I think right now, this moment is it's very tense. It's very hot. There's a lot of rightful outrage over police brutality and, the murder of George Floyd. One of many, many different African-American people I can name who's been murdered and brutalized by the police. I mean, just in these last, 5-10 years, and of course, a long history going back. What can we do as white Americans to make people of color feel more heard while maybe not, and I'm not saying it's not the right thing to go out and protest, I'm a little torn about that, but in terms of the pandemic, I have fears about going out and protesting, both in terms of potentially catching COVID and then also potentially further spreading it if I happen to be asymptomatic. So, I know we talked about talking to people online and things like that. Well, what is your stance on the protests? And I know it's a hot thing.
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's terrifying that these are, that there's a virus out there and people are in the streets and people aren't wearing masks and they're too close. So, maybe this is, being a mom or whatever, but I hate seeing those young people at like the beaches that are not wearing masks. And, and actually, honestly, I wouldn't be in this conversation with you if I hadn't looked out the window of my studio watching my neighbors essentially walk around without any protection during this time for like those first 3.5 weeks, literally, until the governor of New Jersey said you can't go into a store without a mask. There was just nothing happening. It was just not crossing line into this Spanish speaking community. And honestly, there's a lot of undocumented people in my neighborhood. So the fear, the relationship to authority, I mean, like all the tough issues are on the table right now with the pandemic. And I would be a person who would naturally be inclined to protest around something like this, and I have, but not during this pandemic. I'm not,
Right.
you know, I was drawn, I almost did it. And luckily my 20-year-old son's living with me. He's like, Ma, what are you doing? You can't go do this. Are you crazy? I'm like, he's so right, you know, and it's not like I haven't been thinking, I don't want him out anywhere, you know.
Right.
Also, it's very difficult. I think it's a lot of difficult decisions for people.
Yeah.
Really painful. So I don't think I have a great answer to that question. I just would say, you know, if you have the luxury to stay out of, you know, spaces where you're not protected, you should take advantage of it. You're doing everybody a favor. To your point, wearing the mask is about protecting people, you know. And one of the things that, you know, I found interesting on the call with my international friends was, you know, people just saying, well, in some of the Asian countries, people have worn masks to protect other people from their illnesses for generations.
Absolutely.
You know, and to be honest, I didn't actually know that. I didn't know that. Yeah. So, you know, it's, you're just not giving everyone your cold, you know, you're not giving everyone your flu, whatever. You know, it's amazing. So there's a huge cultural, you know, difference. Not so much in Asian countries. It wasn't such a big deal for everybody to be wearing a mask. Here we're going nuts because we're like individualistic, you know, it has to be what I decide I want to do. Well, sorry, we got a virus. It's nothing to do with that. Crazy.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think we saw that certainly in America, and we saw, you know, some of those cultural differences when it comes to Italy, for instance, with, you know, many generations of people living in the same home, and it's a very close contact kind of culture, you know, the kissing on both sides of the cheek and the hugging. And I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I want to be kissing and hugging people too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's very tough. So have you been ramping up a little bit of the puppets and maybe some of your art in light of the fact that you want an outlet for, you know, some of this outrage, but maybe it's been hard to find? I mean, I've been watercoloring a little bit.
You what?
I've been watercoloring a little bit.
Oh, that's great.
For me.
Yeah, I definitely have been I'm a prolific character in, you know, in any circumstance. Sometimes I think I should have been a farmer because I get up early and I go to work no matter what it is, you know. So, but yeah, I would say I'm branching out into a number of different themes now. One of the things I've started to work on is family dynamics, people's like family secrets, little stories about, you know, personal, like a friend of mine that talks about in my most recent puppet about finding out when she was 18 that her father was adopted and all the ramifications of this family secret, you know. And, as you get older, you discover there's a lot more family secrets around you than you would think. So, you know, so I do find myself maybe taking a little bit of break of the heaviness of what I've been doing with the bias issues and the virus, and going a little bit more on the personal side, maybe because it's been so overwhelming. And, you know, I can't sleep when I watch, you know, even like, you know, the TV, just news right before I go to bed. I'm just like, wow, I just can't. So I think I'm using my art, you know, a little bit, maybe the way you're using your watercolors too, you know, just a little bit of, you know, maybe if I sew the puppet's shoe on, I'll just chill for a while.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'll design that pair of pants she's wearing, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, something like that is helping. Yep.
A little reprieve.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can't be, you know, we want to be informed, but I can't be stressed and outraged the whole day. I mean, it's just too much of a burden, and it's not really productive, unfortunately. I mean, you know, it is important to know what's going on, but if I'm forced to stay home and, you know, I can talk to people online, but if that's really the extent of it, I just don't need to hear every last person's opinion and the news and whatnot. It's just a little too much to bear.
Absolutely.
On top of already the stresses of the pandemic and just being inside. It's just
I'm glad you're on watercolors.
Yeah, I'm glad too. I found them in a drawer sort of at the beginning of this, and I was like, I haven't really done anything like that in a while. I always enjoyed it. You know, why not? It's
That's great.
Yeah, takes your mind off of things too. It's
Yeah.
very helpful. It's away from the screen too, which is nice.
Right. Good point.
So rounding out here, I like to close my conversations with this. Are there any, what are a few things that you can't wait to do again that you're looking forward to?
Post-virus phase?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Ooh. Maybe visiting people that I can't see is number one.
Yeah.
Being able to go somewhere that involves transportation, like subway, bus, airplane, you name it, just not a car, by myself or with my, immediate family.
Right.
Things like that. I mean, I feel lucky because the part of New Jersey where I live, there's hiking, and I live near a lake and I can swim already, even though it's pretty early. So I'm feeling very spoiled by those options, A lot of my friends, I have sort of a I'll call her my semi-adopted daughter, who is 31, living on the 26th floor of a project in Gramercy Park right now with her third graders. So she's one of my voices, and it's hard to feel like I'm sort of struggling, given my backdrop.
Right.
And most of my friends, a lot of my friends are afraid to go outside in different parts of Brooklyn. They don't feel like they can go to the park even. It's really tough. Everybody's different vulnerabilities, health-wise, etc. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the parks are very crowded now too. I mean, I've been going on bike rides, and the parks are packed. I mean, people are partying pretty hard in the park. I'm gonna be honest.
It's crazy. It's really. I mean, there's nothing like this.
I know.
I mean, it just gets more and more surreal. Like the looting out the window nights, people not sleeping. It's just, I don't know.
I know.
I wish I could say something cheerful.
Yeah, I wish I could too. I don't know. I just feel like it's important, as much as I also preach, staying a little bit away from the news. I think it's also important to embrace the moment and how things are different. I think there is something of an issue of just trying to, pretend like things are normal, or just try to live like a normal life and kind of cut things out. I mean, I think there's too much going on in reality to try to create your own little tiny bubble reality. I mean, if you have if you have other kinds of mental health issues where you just can't have those kinds of stressors, I understand, and things like that. But to just be to just try to live like things are normal and complain that you're a little bored, which is something I was hearing from people. I was like, that's not acceptable anymore. I'm sorry.
I'm with you on that one. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I would say that it has improved my cooking skills, because I don't think everybody cared as much, when you can have the option to eat something that someone else made. So there's an upside. My dinners are better.
Definitely, yes. My cooking has improved as well. Well, Wendy, thank you very much for coming on the program. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and share your insights. I think it was really wonderful for me, and hopefully great for the audience as well.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Great to meet you too.
Great to meet you. Yes. So, thank you so much. And I'll let you know when I post it. Should be in a day.
Terrific. Thanks. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye, Wendy.